What I mentioned a few minutes ago is something that I want to discuss right now. And if you go back to the AFC Championship game in January, I'm of the belief that the Ravens allowed the bully to come into Baltimore and out-bully the bully. The psychological warfare part of the game, to me, was won by Kansas City that night. I would argue that today in Pittsburgh, very similarly was done by the Steelers. This was as Chippy gets. And while it was fantastic that it had a Ravens Steelers of old feel to it, I think it actually came back to plague Baltimore. I think Pittsburgh won the psychological warfare side of things. And certainly these two players were among the chippiness. Marlon Humphrey, Ravens cornerback, George Pickens, Steelers wide receiver, two of the biggest personalities on the field week in and week out, no matter who's playing. Listen to what Marlon Humphrey had to say post-game, because this, to me, was really reflective of where I think the Ravens were emotion-wise earlier today in Pittsburgh.
Kind of chippy in the first half on your side of the field. What went into those couple plays back to back before that flag was thrown?
Shoot, honestly, man, I was. It was a lot. It was a lot. I've been in this rivalry for a while, and I told the guys, man, I just. It was a lot. The emotions were high for me. Honestly, it was. I can't really say I've. Honestly, I can't really say I've been in a situation where I felt kind of so emotional during the game. And
Pause. He's saying he's never felt that emotional in a game. Keep in mind, this is all pro Marlon Humphrey. This is Marlon who yet again put this team in a position to win today, even if it was a gift thrown up there by Russell Wilson. And he's had a couple of those gifts given him to him throughout this year. He's got 5 total, which is good for second league-wide among all defensive players. Marlon's having a hell of a year. And you can tell that frustrations have been boiling over because while individually he's having an exceptional year, collectively as a group, that secondary, we know it's been their Achilles heel. But what I'm wondering is, why did emotions get to a certain level where it became a detriment? And I think there's a correlation between lack of discipline and emotions overflowing. And that, to me, is particularly in the first half after the whistle. There was a lot of unsportsmanlike. There were unsportsmanlike flags flying everywhere, right? You had McCary and Minkah Fitzpatrick tangled up. You had Marlon Humphrey out there doing all kinds of stuff. This was Ravens Steelers, don't get me wrong, and it's refreshing. But I'm of the belief that the Ravens lost the psychological warfare battle today in this regard. And I think there's a trickle-down effect there. I think there's a trickle-down effect, again, when it comes to disciplined football or lack thereof. And I maybe even go as far as to say there's a trickle-down effect when it comes to simple execution, i.e. the Zay Flowers drop, which hit him right in the chest. He was caught looking downfield, and obviously the rest, we know what happened. Here's the rest of what Marlon had to say.
I kind of blame it on my family group message, mainly my big sister. But, yeah, man, I told some of the guys, I was like, y'all, help me out, man. I'm kind of emotions are flying for me, and so they helped me out. But, yeah, it was different, man. I found myself watching over the years the Ravens Steelers highlights the other day. I don't know. I mean, I love this rivalry. I love rivalry games, but this is really the one. You know, you got the Browns, the Bengals, but to me, this is really the one. You want to get the dub. You know, you came up short, but yeah, just can't do that. Can't let the emotions get the best of you, and that's no big deal really. You got one, you can't get two, and try not to make a habit of that.
Holding himself accountable, but clearly Marlon was in a different universe in game, and I think he's often shown that he can channel that energy and he can keep it to a certain level where he's not hurting the team, but unsportsmanlike conduct flags do hurt the team. It does hinder what you're trying to accomplish. And again, I think that trickle-down effect is real. George Pickens, his perspective on Marlon?
Especially with Humphrey, it seemed like he was involved with everybody.
Yeah. He was. It was a very, rivalry game, very chippy game. I think from the previous years, me game winner in him just trying to come out with a tougher mentality, but also costing his team flags. You know what I mean? So I probably say just aggressiveness. It's a rivalry game, so something you expect.
George Pickens finishes with a game-high 8 receptions for 89 yards. He was targeted 12 times by Russell Wilson and had that long of 37, which was the classic moon ball, dropped in to the bucket by Russ. And, of course, who was in coverage? This is not to pick on Brandon Stevens. I actually thought he had – I want to be careful with how I say this because I know you guys are going to use every single word. Brandon had a better game than what we have seen in recent weeks. He had a nice pass breakup on Calvin Austin. He did get burnt badly on the sideline for a missed tackle by Pickens. And, of course, he was on the wrong side of that moon ball where, yet again, Brandon is going to run with you stride for stride. He's going to be attached to your hip. He's going to, if the ball comes in and he sees it, he'll have good hand usage. He's a physical player. He's a good locker room guy. He's a good dude. One thing he's not doing consistently is locating the football. It's in the blind spot. John Gruden covered it in recent weeks. We've watched it happen in recent weeks. And at some point, you kind of say to yourself, I'm done making excuses for this guy in terms of like drawing tough assignments year in and year out and coming off a breakout year, which he had a season ago. Brandon Stevens has become a liability. And I think maybe, just maybe, the blessing in all of this, the Ravens may have a new corner who they can rely on. Tre'Davious White made his debut as a Raven, guys, and he showed up and showed out. This is a dude who's 13 months removed from a torn Achilles. And he's breaking up big-time plays in the end zone with George Pickens. He came to play. He had 2 pass deflections. I can't wait to see the final snap count. I mean, Tre'Davious was sent out to the Wolves. He was fed to the Wolves by the Rams to the point where he asked for a trade. He was a healthy scratch leading into the deadline for a month. And now he might be starting. He might be starting for the Ravens, guys. It's kind of scary to think, given some of the coverage numbers when he was in LA this year. He talked with reporters post-game. Gianna Hahn of the Baltimore Banner noted that Tre'Davious said he only played on, quote, familiar play calls since the Ravens defense is complex and he's still learning. I saw some of that was getting run in the post-game scrum on social. He said he's put in a lot of hours in the film room with more to come and that a lot of the DBs have been helping him get up to speed. Well, it's working so far. And again, I would not be surprised. And I said this in the week leading up. I felt like part of the personnel changes that were coming, I didn't see the whole Ardarius Washington, Kyle Hamilton on the back end from a deep safety standpoint per se, but I certainly saw Tre'Davious White being an easy add-in. Let's get him ramped up. Let's get him involved. That's exactly what the Ravens did, and it's paying early dividends. Tre'Davious White, here's the crazy part. Don't go look at the coverage numbers. It's going to psych you out. If you go look at the coverage numbers from what he did through 4 games with the Rams, you're not going to want to see him. Now, with that said, part of the reporting after his departure was that one of the reasons why he wanted out was because he kind of felt like he was being taken advantage of a little bit because of how little depth they were having in Rams country at corner, meaning they had to use him earlier than maybe preferred coming off the torn Achilles. And so if that's the case, and he's had some time to ramp himself up over the next month and rehab and build strength, and now he's enjoying this rejuvenation, hey, who's to say that he can't help save the season on the back end from a secondary standpoint? Now, along the lines of the emotions, of course, Patrick Queen has to be part of that conversation as well, reuniting with his former team for the first time. PQ had himself a game. He had a team high in Pittsburgh, 10 total tackles, 3 of which were solo, a tackle for loss. PQ did have a penalty. Matter of fact, his holding penalty wiped out a sack that I believe TJ Watt got on Lamar Jackson. Mark Andrews was going through his route, and PQ ended up holding him. But Patrick came to play, and you could tell because of all the talking, because of all the emotions, because of him taking a lot of the business in the offseason personally, and then ultimately signing a 3-year, $41 million contract with Pittsburgh. This meant something to him. And I think Mike Tomlin made that clear post-game as well.
Queen.
You know, one man's trash is another man's treasure, man. I'm glad he is on our team.
One man's trash is another man's treasure. One more time.
What can you say about Queen?
You know, one man's trash is another man's treasure, man. I'm glad he is on our team.
I don't know whether or not he means it literally there, but look, they didn't view PQ as trash. They made a business decision and gave Roquan a record-setting deal, drafted Trenton Simpson, and after PQ had an all-pro season and sort of a late-blooming career after struggling, particularly in coverage and in space earlier on at the start of his career, they let him walk, and he ultimately goes to Pittsburgh after, I would think, probably being pretty underwhelmed by what the free agent linebacker market showed him this offseason. 3 years for 41. Roquan, a couple years prior, 5 for 100. It's kind of a tough pill to swallow for a guy who was his running mate last year. But the PQ element, certainly, along with Deshaun Elliott, 2 former Ravens that did a lot of talking leading up to this game, they got the last laugh in this one, at least for now. And again, the rematch, we all know, it's circled in the calendar, coming up December 21st, right around the corner. Other Ravens defensive notes. Marcus Williams was benched again. I mean, nobody's talking about it, but Marcus Williams was benched. He played at least one defensive snap after Kyle Hamilton went down. He was in concussion protocol for a while. Then he comes back out on the field. When Roquan Smith goes down with the hamstring, all of a sudden Kyle's got to put on the helmet for the green dot device. There was a lot happening there in the fourth quarter. But Marcus Williams on the outside looking in right now on this team. Eddie Jackson doesn't even travel. And David Ojabo was a healthy scratch for the 3rd time this year. So a lot of disappointing storylines as you look around the league, particularly given not around the league, but particularly around this Ravens defense. And yet this was a group that you could probably argue put forth its best performance of the entire year, maybe with one exception being that Sunday Night Football dominance against the Buffalo Bills.